When the State of Israel was founded in 1948, the lie was propagated that this was a land without a people for a people without a land, and that God had promised this land to the Jewish people long ago. Now, in a second, we will crack open this Bible and expose the absolute horror show behind that scriptural claim. But first, let's be clear. In reality, there already were people living in the land that is now Israel. Almost 2 million Palestinians. So what did the Zionist founders of Israel do? Between 1947 and 1949, these Zionists unleashed a massive campaign of terror and mass expulsions. They drove at least 750,000 Palestinians from their homes. They carried out over 70 massacres. They destroyed over 500 Palestinian villages. These Zionists literally built their homes and their new state of Israel on the ashes of these ruins. And all of this, and all the ongoing violence and expansion, the unjust wars, and now the outright genocide being inflicted on the people of Gaza, and the killings and torture that is running wild in the West Bank, has been backed and enabled by Israel's imperialist masters, most of all today, the United States. But what about the claim that the Zionists put forth that according to Scripture, this land rightfully belongs to the Jewish people, as it was supposedly promised to them by God?
Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion often said that the Bible was the Jewish mandate for settling the land of Israel. In the book of Genesis, God gave the land to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs of Israel. And the rest of the Bible tells the story of their descendants in the land.
Well, the truth is that when the founders of Zionism set out looking for a place to erect their Jewish supremacist state, they considered setting it up in many different parts of the world, not just in Palestine. They looked at Paraguay, they looked at South Africa. So this wasn't really about this historic biblical claim. And they openly pitched their new state to the European powers as a colonial project. In other words, they made clear that they'd act as enforcers of imperialist domination wherever they set up. But there is another problem with this so-called scriptural historical claim to the land of Palestine. A reason why the Zionists who claim this should really be hoping that no one looks too closely into it. And that is this. If you look at the Old Testament of the Bible, much of which corresponds to Jewish scripture, it is clear that in the territory that according to this scripture had been promised by God to the ancient Israelites, there were already other people living there then as well. The book of Joshua tells the story of one of Moses' generals leading the Israelites to cross the Jordan River and steal the lands and slaughter all the people who lived in that area, which is now Palestine.
Joshua. Huh? Who? Who is that? It's me, Joshua. God, I have chosen you, Joshua, to lead the Israelites to the promised land.
This conquest includes the Battle of Jericho. Now, if you're like me, you learned this story in Sunday school and you sang the song, Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho.
Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho, and the walls came a-tumbling down.
But do you know what the Israelites did once the walls of Jericho allegedly tumbled down? According to Joshua, chapter 6, verse 21, after the wall collapsed, the Israelites charged into the city and, quote, they devoted all in the city to destruction, both men and women, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys, with the edge of the sword. And after bringing out the prostitute Rahab, who had betrayed the city and helped the Israelites, as well as her family, the Bible goes on in Joshua 10:24 to say this, quote, then the Israelites burned the whole city and everything in it. They put the silver and the gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. And that was just one of the cities the Israelites utterly destroyed, according to Scripture. And the 10th chapter of Joshua alone, there is the slaughter of every inhabitant of the Makkedah, then the Libnah, then Lachish, then Eglon, then Hebron, then Debir, and city after city beyond that. At each point, the Bible spells out so there can be no confusion that this was genocidal slaughter. And describing the destruction of Negev and the whole region from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza and from Goshen to Gibeon, the Bible is very specific. Quote, Joshua subdued the whole region. He left no survivors. He totally destroyed all who breathed. At other points, the Israelites called out every one of their soldiers to individually stomp on the neck of the kings they had conquered. And then they impaled these kings' bodies and left them on spikes. And when there was a soldier who betrayed Joshua's command, he, Achan, is brought out before all the people of Israel and stoned to death as an example and a warning to all the others. Now, all of this is what the Lord of the Bible is commanding and celebrating. And all of this is what the Zionist upholders of the state of Israel are resting their so-called spiritual claim to Palestine upon. And finally, after all of this, and much more slaughter that goes on bloody page after bloody page, there is Joshua 24:13, describing what the Lord allegedly said to the Israelites upon their victory. Quote, So I gave you a land on which you did not toil, and cities you did not build, and you live in them and eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. End quote. To the degree that any of this reflects actual history, the parallels with the modern situation of Palestine and Israel are in fact quite striking and damning. Now, the rest of this Bible is also bloodthirsty and filled with ignorance and reactionary moral codes, not just the Old Testament, which parallels the Jewish scripture, but also the New Testament, which many Christians claim supersedes the Old Testament. But this book as a whole, which consists to a large degree of made-up things and distortions of actual history, is never a source that should be relied on as the basis for claims and demands. And the same can be said of the scriptures of every religion. And certainly, in this case in particular, this scriptural history is not something that the Zionists should really want to invoke.